walk in and want a drink, of course, everybody's drinking, everybody's having a good time.
A woman has a choice whether or not to take somebody home or to go home with someone. Basically, it's always their choice.
That doesn't mean to her, you know, that she wants to have sex. It might mean she wants to get to know this guy. You know, she's out to meet people and she's attracted to this guy.
If I've been drinking and they've been drinking, and you know we're messing around, you know, how do I know that, you know, she's not giving me consent or she doesn't want to do it? And it's, you know, from a legal perspective, yes, these can be extremely murky questions to answer.
You know, for me, I think there are a couple of simple rules that any student should understand. They're non-legalistic, and it's really all about how consent works. You know, you could argue that the rules on rape and sexual assault are complicated. They're really not. They can be boiled down to this. If you want to have sex with a man or a woman, a partner, get their permission. If you don't get their permission, go to prison.
There are physical cues that guys should look out for. If you're making out with a girl and things are moving really fast and all of a sudden she just freezes and is doing nothing, don't continue what you're doing. Stop and ask her, is this okay? You know, is this okay what I'm doing? Are you still into this? Because you're not acting like you really want this to happen.
So consent to one form of sexual activity can't be seen to imply consent to any other form of sexual activity. If somebody kisses you, you have consent to kiss. If somebody gives you oral sex, you have consent to oral sex. That doesn't mean you're going anywhere else. In some ways, the idea of foreplay and the idea of consent don't work well together, because foreplay implies afterplay. And sometimes a kiss is just a kiss, sometimes a blowjob is just a blowjob, and sometimes it is preparation for some other sex. But the assumption that you make that it's one or the other is where you get in trouble. You need to check in with your partner and see if they have the same intentions that you do.
That's a question when you're drinking alcohol. Does the person have the capacity to give consent? So is that person able to understand what it is that they're doing? Is the person so incapacitated that they are unable to control their own actions or understand their own actions? And again, depending on the state it is, it's going to depend on at what point there's incapacity.
The question is, what's permission? You know, and if I go out to dinner with someone and she is willing to go back to my room, does that mean she wants something sexual? And so permission is specific. It's overt, it's active, it doesn't have to be verbal, but it has to be clear so that you're agreeing to do the same thing at the same time in the same way with each other.
Has he said, let's go back to my place and talk? Which is usually what they say. And she says, yes, I'll go back to your place and talk. Well, she's agreed to go back to his place and talk. You know, at some point, there has to be an understanding between the both of them that it's going to go to some other level before you can even start to question whether it's consent. But just because a woman goes home with a man doesn't mean that she's consenting to have sex with him.
A girl agreeing to kiss a guy is not giving them consent. Okay, I want to have sexual intercourse with you now.
A sexual assault is a criminal offense. And in fact, if we use the term rape, you know, which is part of that domain of sexual assault, so rape, and I'll define it here just so everybody's clear. Rape being the sexual penetration of an individual against their will, without their consent. All right, so it could be through force, but it could be through intimidation, through blackmail, through a variety of other means. Rape, in most states, is one of the most serious criminal offenses on the books.
About 90% of the rapes that are happening on campus are because of about 5% of the guys. And so you see over and over again that the complaints are being brought to the school that this guy is sexually harassing them, that he's stalking them, that he may have raped them, that he has assaulted them.
So can a woman who's been drinking give consent?
That's a good question. Whether a woman can give consent when she's been drinking has to do with whether or not she's incapacitated. So it's going to depend on how the school defines consent as to, or any of the laws define consent, as to whether or not someone, at what level they're too incapacitated to give consent. But incapacity for consent is a defense. There has to be a consent at each step, and that consent can be taken away. So let's say she's been drinking, she's capable of giving consent, and at some point she becomes so incapacitated that she's no longer able to give consent, that consent is revoked at that point. So, for example, let's say she goes home and she had just done 6 shots before she walked out the door. By the time she gets to his house, she's probably going to be unconscious or incapacitated. If he thought he had consent when they left the bar to go home and have sex, at that point that she's incapacitated, he has no consent. And so he's not going to be able to prove that he had her consent to have sex, and that's going to be a violation of the law.